Have you ever wondered why the Islam of traditionalists has so many parallels with biblical narrations? I'm talking about things like the creation story from Genesis, including Adam and Eve, the original sin, as well as the elevation of Jesus to some sort of semi-divine status. Well, it comes down, in large part, to the Hadith literature, and in particular, the Hadiths of one prolific narrator, our old friend Abu Huraira. Of course, there are many different Sahaba who narrate sayings of Prophet Muhammad that are of Judeo-Christian origin. However, most narrators present these traditions in essentially tokenistic and symbolic ways, with little, if any, canonical implications. It is overwhelmingly through the Abu Huraira narrations that we find aspects of Judeo-Christian doctrine, forming the basis of widely accepted articles of Islamic faith and Sharia law. This involves narrations of a number of different key topics, a few of which I will briefly cover. Amongst the numerous hadiths about Jesus, Abu Huraira's narrations stand alone in dabbling in New Testament themes of Jesus' semi-divinity. One commonly narrated Abu Huraira hadith, which has multiple versions, sets Jesus and his mother Mary apart from the rest of mankind by stating that every human being ever born, except these two, are pricked by Satan when they are born. Interestingly, while there are several different Sahaba who narrate hadiths that babies are pricked by Satan, it is only Abu Huraira who mentions Jesus and Mary as being the exceptions, thus being alone amongst all the Sahaba in elevating Jesus and his mother to a higher status than every other human on earth. In contrast to this Abu Huraira hadith that insinuates that Mary is superior to all other women on earth, another series of hadith found in Bukhari and narrated by several different companions ranks Mary merely as equal in stature to Pharaoh's wife Asiya, and even implies that she is inferior to the Prophet's wife Aisha.
And no doubt, the superiority of Aisha to other women is like the superiority of tharid, i.e. a meat and bread dish, to other meals.
And to emphasize, Abu Huraira never narrated this hadith, just as no other Sahaba besides Abu Huraira narrate the hadith that sets Jesus' mother Mary at a higher status than all other women. And here we begin to see a sort of toing and froing between Abu Huraira and the rest of the Sahaba, as if the rest of the Sahaba are trying to counter Abu Huraira's biblical-centric narrations with counter-narrations that refute him. And in fact, as we will see, this trend becomes even more stark in other hadithic themes. Perhaps the most vivid depictions of Jesus' semi-divine status in Abu Huraira's narrations are contained in those hadith which prophesize the return of Jesus during the end of days. While it's true that the hadithic foretelling of the return of Jesus to fight the Dajjal, a mythical anti-hero who himself is lifted directly from the biblical Antichrist, stem from many different narrators, not just Abu Huraira. It is significant, however, that only the Abu Huraira narrations specifically identify Jesus as both the spiritual and political leader of the Muslims during this tumultuous period. There are several different versions of this narration. In this one, he says Jesus will be a just leader for mankind. And in another, he says that Jesus will judge mankind, which sounds almost as if he has godlike privileges. And here again, on this topic, we see the same tug-o-war between Abu Huraira and other Sahaba with conflicting and seemingly competing narratives about Jesus' role during his second coming. Other hadiths, narrated by other Sahaba, seem remarkably pointed in contrasting Abu Huraira's narration, as if to directly refute him. For example, in this narration, it is claimed that Jesus will be invited to lead the Muslims in prayer, but will decline, saying, "No, some amongst you are commanders over some amongst you." This directly contradicts Abu Huraira's narration that specifically refers to Jesus leading the Muslims in prayer.
Certainly, the time of prayer shall come, and then Jesus, peace be upon him, son of Mary, would descend and would lead them.
The Old Testament is of course famous for its account of creation happening over the course of 6 days, just 1 week in our calendar. And while it is true, the Quran also mentions 6 days for creation, Muslims generally agree this is not referring to actual days, as we understand them, but rather to eons, each lasting a very long time, perhaps millions of years. Which, incidentally, is the same number of eras geologists have hypothesized the Earth has gone through during its development. Abu Huraira, however, is unique amongst hadith narrators in transmitting narrations that describe creation in the same literal 6 days of the week of the Bible. Thus, in one famous hadith, he ascribes one aspect of creation for every day of the week, culminating in the creation of man on the 6th and last day. Just like the account in the Old Testament. And we know Abu Huraira is talking about literal days of the week, as opposed to metaphorical days that last eons. This is because of the significance he gives in other hadiths for Friday, the day in which man was supposedly created. While Abu Huraira is not the only narrator to emphasize the importance of Friday, what is significant is that he is the only narrator to specifically explain that the day's significance lies in the fact that man was created on that day. And even more interestingly, in one hadith, Abu Huraira directly appeals to Jewish doctrinal authority to prove his claim about the holy significance of Friday. Relaying a conversation he had with a Jewish convert, Ka'b, he says that each Friday
contains a time at which no Muslim prays and asks anything from Allah, but he will give it to him. Ka'b said, "That is one day every year." So I said, "It is on every Friday." Ka'b read the Torah and said, "The Messenger of Allah has spoken the truth."
And thus Abu Huraira strongly implies that the Islamic sanctity of Friday finds support in the Jews' primary holy text, the Torah. Abu Huraira narrates several hadith related to the creation of man that appear to have been lifted directly from biblical Jewish tradition. In fact, pretty much all the most notorious biblical traditions about Adam and Eve and their downfall enter the Islamic tradition solely through Abu Huraira hadiths. This includes the biblical depiction of Adam being created in God's image. A hadith that causes particular cognitive dissonance amongst Muslims, given how it directly contradicts the Quranic assertion that nothing in creation resembles God. Hence you can see here that the Sunnah.com translator can't even bring themselves to translate the word as image and instead uses the word picture. Even though picture in this context makes the sentence sound quite odd. Also, in yet another nod to Jewish tradition, we see in the same hadith, the claim that Adam was a huge giant, 60 cubits in height, but thereafter man grew progressively smaller until reaching their current size. This very closely resembles an account in the Jewish Talmud, which says Adam was created in gigantic proportions, but after he sinned, God made him smaller. Perhaps most controversially was the Abu Huraira narration about Adam's wife Eve, or Hawa, in Arabic. And like the Bible, which ascribes Eve's behavior as having lasting negative impacts on mankind, Abu Huraira's narration claims that women betray their husbands because of Eve. And to emphasize, for all of these themes, Adam being created in God's image, Adam being a mega giant, 60 cubits tall, as well as Eve being the cause of all women to be defective, are solely narrated by Abu Huraira and no other Sahaba. Speculation has been rife as to why Abu Huraira was so Judeo-Christian-centric in his hadithic narrations compared to his fellow companions. Many polemists point to the fact that he had a very close friendship with one Ka'b al-Ahbar, a Jew from Yemen, who later joined the early Muslim community. Though there is debate as to whether he actually converted to Islam. Ka'b is a controversial figure, but was known to be unsurpassed in his knowledge of Jewish doctrine. Some critics argue that Ka'b remained loyal to the Jews and used his influence with the early Muslims to lead them astray by inserting key Jewish articles of faith into Islamic doctrine. To this end, Abu Huraira, who himself was able to read Hebrew and was familiar with the Torah, was a key tool for Ka'b as a conduit for this campaign of misinformation. This alleged manipulation of Abu Huraira by Ka'b is probably the most popular theory to explain Abu Huraira's Jew-centric hadiths. However, it doesn't explain the Christian influence found in his hadiths, such as the near deification of Jesus. To help explain this, allow me to present a hypothesis of my own.
I've got a theory.
Abu Huraira lived for a long time after the Prophet's death, dying sometime around 678 AH. Thus he was living during the time of the spectacular Muslim conquests out of Arabia and into the rich cultural center of Syria and its capital Damascus. This area was, at this point in history, the cultural center of Christianity, and in addition had a rich intellectual foundation, led by both Christians and Jews. The conquests also gave the Muslims control of the spiritual capital of both Jews and Christians, Jerusalem. And to their credit, the Muslim conquerors did not try and dismantle or undermine this great intellectual and cultural foundation. And thanks to the institution of the jizya system, Christians and Jews were mostly free to continue their intellectual pursuits, which incidentally paid dividends for the Muslims during the so-called Islamic Golden Age. Now taking two things into consideration. Firstly, the strength and influence the Judeo-Christian intellectual base must have had on the Muslim conquerors. And secondly, the lack of any intellectual tradition of the Arab Muslims to counter them. Remembering that, hitherto, these conquerors were primarily Bedouin traders and camel herders. Given these two factors, would it be surprising if there was a sudden and massive influence by this dominant Judeo-Christian intellectual force on what was then really the one intellectual pursuit the Muslims had, namely the compiling of the Hadithic literature? And if this was the case, who would be in the middle of such a transformation of this Hadithic literature? Who else but the most prolific transmitter of Hadith literature, and soon to be the only living Sahaba left? One can only speculate why Abu Huraira, at this late stage in his life, would participate in such corruption of the Prophet's teachings. Perhaps to curry favor with the new intellectual masters of the Islamic world. Or perhaps old age, as well as the distance of time, caused genuine confusion for him as to what the Prophet truly said, compared to all the misinformation that was flying around at that time, dominated, no doubt, by Judeo-Christian influences. Either way, we know for a fact that for a period before his death, Abu Huraira was the only original Sahaba left alive, and thus considered to be an incredibly valuable and revered resource amongst the Hadith community. He could have, and probably did, come up with any old crap to feed the hungry hadithists of his time, and they would have lapped it all up unquestioningly. I hope you enjoyed this analysis of Judeo-Christian influence in the Hadithic literature. Please like, subscribe and comment to help promote and grow this channel. I look forward to seeing you again soon for my next video.